Okay, so I think we're reaching our allotted time to start, so I will get going. It's lovely to have so many of you here this afternoon. My name is Christina Silva, and I manage the CAQDAS networking project. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Sarah Bullock, who is hosting this webinar with me today. Actually, this is our 28th CAQDAS webinar. We started these webinars during the pandemic as a way of keeping the discussion going whilst we couldn't meet people in person, and they've been a resounding success. So this is going to be another treat for us today, and I will be introducing Dr. Susanne Friese to you very shortly, who's going to be speaking to us today. Before I do that, just to remind you that we have got 3 more webinars scheduled before the end of the academic year, so before the end of July. You can see those there, and you can also see the details to access other information about what we do at the CAQDAS networking project, which is based in the Department of Sociology at the University of Surrey. So do hook into our awareness raising and training activities, and if there's anything that you'd like to see us discuss in one of these webinars or training sessions, then do let us know. Sarah and myself are always really interested to hear what researchers, methodologists, developers are interested in discussing, and we do our best to provide sessions which are useful and interesting. So do let us know. Also, if you're a researcher or a student using a qualitative software program, we're really keen to hear how you're getting on, and if you'd like to deliver a webinar about your own use of any software, then we'd love to hear from you. Okay, so on to the matter of today. It's a CAQDAS methodological webinar, and I've got great pleasure to introduce you to a long-standing friend and colleague of the CAQDAS networking project, and myself personally, Dr. Susanne Friese. Susanne began her academic career at the University of Bonn, where she studied nutrition and home economics. But she became interested in qualitative research and the use of software to support qualitative data analysis during her master's thesis that she undertook at the University of Oregon in the United States. And that was back in the early 1990s. And after her master's, or during that time, I think in the early 90s, she was employed by Qualys Research in the United States, and they developed one of the pioneer CAQDAS-packages, the ethnograph. And after that, Susanne joined the CAQDAS networking project, which is where Sarah and I now work. But unfortunately, our paths didn't overlap at that time, and Susanne was working then with Anne Lewins, who many of you may know, teaching the ethnograph, NuDist, and later on other software packages, MAXQDA and ATLAS.ti. But it's not just qualitative methods and software that Susanne has experience with. During her time at the Copenhagen Business School in Denmark, she carried out a variety of research projects using both qualitative and quantitative methods, using SPSS for quantitative data analysis and ATLAS.ti for qualitative data analysis. And she's since worked very closely with the developers of ATLAS.ti. Thomas Muir, one of them, is here today. And Susanne has made principal contributions to the user manual of ATLAS.ti, and she's also written a couple of editions of her textbook, Qualitative Data Analysis of ATLAS.ti, which was published by Sage Publications. So despite her focus with ATLAS.ti and her incredible experience with that particular program, she's also maintained great interest and expertise in the range of digital tools for qualitative data analysis. And that's what she's going to share with us today in her presentation, which is going to be about building code systems for computer-assisted qualitative data analysis using different methodological approaches and software tools. So before I hand over to Susanne and let her take us through that presentation, please do feel free to post any questions, comments, reflections that you have whilst she's speaking, and Sarah and myself will collate that and we will pose those questions to Susanne at the end of the session. We are recording this session, so we will provide the recording to you later on as well. So enough from me. Susanne, over to you.
Yeah, so we already heard the title. Thanks for the for introducing me, Christina. And let's jump into the content. Well, here is way of introduction. I kind of put the text you already read when you signed up for this webinar. Yeah, the aim of this webinar is to show you by way of example how 3 different programs, ATLAS, MAXQDA and NVivo, how to build a code system that is efficient for use with qualitative computer-assisted qualitative data analysis. But before I kind of go into the software programs to show you some examples live, I will introduce that in a more of a theoretical manner. And when I started producing the presentation, that's kind of the 4 points that it came down to. So you have to kind of start reading here from the top. So I will give some examples what often goes wrong, and then I talk about some good practices for developing a code system. Then I bring in those 3 principles of hierarchical coding constructions, and then we move into the examples. So while I'm presenting the next slides, you may as well use the chat and maybe also share your experience, whether you see yourself in any of these examples I'm going to show right now. Of course, 2 examples more like, okay, well, what I also often see is kind of, oh, where's that Excel output? And then everything that was coded is going to be printed out in Excel, and you have to start stacks of paper again on the floor. And I also think that has to do with the coding system not sufficiently built up in a way that is easy then to keep the analysis further in ATLAS, or also being frustrated with the computer and starting with post-it notes all over again. Or what you see here on the ground, so to speak, is a big Excel sheet that the person could print that by her company, is about 2 by 3 meters on the floor, because she didn't know how to continue in the software. And often people do the right thing in terms of what they need to do. They need to aggregate, but they don't know how to do that in software. So I hope hopefully none of you actually has been in that position where you kind of got frustrated and, well, I print now everything out and read stuff on paper again, or copy and paste things in Word. So that's also part of an idea of this presentation, that I can keep you in the software so you get an idea how you build that code system efficiently. This now is an ATLAS screenshot, but it could be in any other software where you just have a bunch of codes that, well, you see here, there's some, individual needs and system needs and stuff like that. Some things a bit organized already, but we don't see any structure. It's just a bunch of codes that still need some organization. What sometimes people do, or when they use ATLAS, is using these code groups, but most people know that's not how you structure a code system. This is it, filter your data, but not to structure your code system. Otherwise, you're going to still have this list of unsorted codes. If you have been listening to me before, I've been reading also my book, you know that I call these kind of codes monster codes. Look at the number of quotations that are in there, or the number of codings that have been done. So there's some serious work that still needs to happen if a coding system looks like this. That's the other aspect that I often see, maybe not as obvious as I've constructed that here. That's done in MAXQDA. And what you see is that lots of codes on the subcode level are duplicated. And I call this that the categories on the wrong level. So you actually, the organization is not perfect. It looks like some structure here. And then we have here that the topic up here is work-life balance. And then, of course, maybe we have, the father and the mother struggling with work-life balance and with, free time or domestic work, or how do you organize childcare and life, work time and so on. But we will talk about some more, how that needs to be remedied. For now, I only want want you to reflect kind of if your code system, have I done something like this before? Have I started to duplicate, and if you use software like also in MAXQDA, I think also in NVivo, you can just copy subcode trees and put them somewhere else, which actually facilitates this kind of wrong way or inefficient way of working. Well, if you look at this, and this is completely constructed here, I messed up a coding system on purpose. That's in NVivo. Anybody has an idea? I maybe wait for a bit for some comments. What's wrong here with that code system? What's actually what needs to be improved, or what's wrong? Anybody has an idea? It's very deep. Somebody says too early categorization.
Too many subcode.
I didn't get that. Can you repeat that? Somebody said something, so no hierarchy, but there is the hierarchy. Well, it looks like a hierarchy, but it's the wrong hierarchy. Yeah, so maybe that's what you mean. So we actually seeing lots of things that are actually put together instead of collecting something on economy in just one of the trees, something on tourism in one of the trees. So all of these things kind of go together. So I see some other comments here, different concepts, idea at the same level, tourism, agriculture, and then jobs and cost of living. Yeah, that's exactly what's wrong with here. Jobs and cost of living not equivalent to tourism. So here there's the children under higher order code. They actually don't have anything to do with that. Higher order code is just a ideas put together, and that happens if people don't think in terms of categorization. They already kind of start to link something. If I have that context and this happens, and that follows. But that comes later. Your code system is in the first place there to organize the content at first, and then later on you start building the relations. So this how it's supposed to look like. So that we have the attitude separately, the sense of community separately, economy separately. It was kind of difficult to see before what belongs together. But here under economy is tourism, agriculture. And then there could be another level, fishing for aquaculture. There are some other subcodes underneath, but then there are smaller details for fishing for aquaculture, but that's also parts of economy. So that from the content, it's kind of all the same. When somebody said that tree is too deep, when you start mixing up things, then of course it happens that your tree gets that deep. And if you just keep things nicely, the parent and the children kind of belongs to the same topic, then you may need to, and sometimes a third level, but not a fourth and fifth level. That's when things often get wrong if you get very deep into your tree. Starting with that reflection, I want to give you some good practice rules to start out with. So think about codes as organizing principles that are not set in stone. We had that comment before, too early categorization. But it's not the end of the world. You just have to be open that, you might start with something and think that fits, and then you review it and realize now that all needs to go differently. And then you start cleaning up. But that's why we have the software, and that's usually easy to do. So it's a tool that we can think with. So sometimes you need to start with some kind of structure, and then it becomes easier to see, oh, I have to put this here and I have to put this here, or that doesn't fit here. And the more data you code, things may actually change. So it can be expanded, changed, scrapped altogether. You can realize that was a completely wrong idea branch. I went off. Yeah, and you will see I always kind of collect things under an independent, I call them, so it's just an independent codes, but that's an ATLAS terminology, could be, just your basket of ideas that you start collecting, but you don't go anywhere, because I usually don't throw them away. It's like it might come handy, but I just park them somewhere, and most of the time they stay parked there. But so it's something that is evolving over time. And in the end, you hope you have some kind of a stable code system, but still, if you started then querying new data, you might still change something as well. Very briefly, just a bit of a recap. You create codes to catch ideas and then grow. So you could start with just a bunch of, that list I had at the beginning, which was not yet unsorted. And we're talking, I said I would also talk a bit about the different methodologies, and the way I see it is it determines kind of the way how you develop codes and where you start, or the type of codes, whether it's discourse analysis or grounded theory or thematic analysis. These are the three approaches I'm going to talk about, where I also show you example projects. But in the end, the code system in the computer, they follow the same rules, the same principles, and how they need to be structured. How you get there, that's different. And the codes, you're going to have the content you're going to code. If in grounded theory, that will be different than discourse analysis. And if you have the thematic analysis, or you have a content analysis, and some codes, themes, they're already kind of available, and you develop parts of it deductively. So these are the difference where that come with the different methodologies, and also some of the different tools you're using, whether you work very interpretive with a grounded theory approach, or whether you work more on that conceptual level with thematic analysis. So just keep that in mind. So in the end, with all methodological approaches, it kind of looks then similar in the software, but it's different ways of getting there. So you begin to sort in connecting. I think by now you have read that. And the idea is, to create categories and subcategories or subcodes. You find, both of these terminologies around. And then that reflects the structure of the data, not your analysis yet. It's just these boxes where you put your data in, so that you then can work with your coded data. So later on, you may construct some more meta codes or abstract codes that reflect more overarching idea. But in the beginning, it's more like putting your data into boxes. And why are we doing that? So why is that useful? Why does it matter, like how the code system is structured? It creates order. That means it brings conceptual clarity for yourself and also others. So that if somebody needs to look at a code system with 150 codes that you know by heart, doesn't mean that somebody else can find their way around it. That would be very difficult. But also for yourself, it provides you it gives you kind of prompts to code additional aspects, or to kind of say, oh, I have this category and it kind of fits there. It might be a new subcode, or having an overview of 10, 12 categories, higher order codes. That's something you can keep in mind and say, oh, I have these topics, and now then once you open that topic, so to speak, you can see what subcodes you have, and then you can apply those subcodes, and without having to have 150 codes in your mind. So it really will help you also in your coding process, so that you don't forget something that you have a similar code, but you lost the overview. And the other next thing is that it will also help you then for the analysis. That you will be able to run a much more powerful analysis, identifying patterns, relation, connections in your data with such a coding system. So I'm going to present you something, and I also have that book here, and I also want to, as Christina said, I'm kind of the first generation Qualitative Computers is a qualitative data analysis user, so to speak. So this is a book from 1995. A lot of you might not have come across that. But in addition to the article I'm referring to now, there's also other interesting stuff in here. And well, I don't think, yeah, there's not so much about, you know, mouse clicks, and yeah, it's hardly any screenshots and stuff. And it's more conceptual work. And the conceptual work, that whether that's, you know, 100 years old or 50 years old or 30 years old, that doesn't change. So that's why I can still recommend this book if you get your handle on it. You know, there's interesting article also, the right brain strikes back and things like that. So just a recommendation to kind of look at that. Yeah, and in this article, and just going back here, it's Lynn and Tom Richards. They're actually the original developers. Yeah, Lynn, you might have come across books from her. She's a methodologist, and Tom, a computer scientist, and they have been developing NVivo and NVivo today. And in that book, they wrote this chapter on principles of hierarchical category constructions. And within that book chapter, we find 3 principles. And we have kind of have seen a bit of those principles already in those examples. So principle 1 is the children of a category should be cases in the same sense as the parents. So this is a quote from the book. So that's how they have formulated it. Yeah, so we have actually seen that with the last example. Yeah, so if you would look here at emotion and anger, and then you're angry because you had an argument with your partner, or you're sad because the weather is bad. So we're already mixing up things here again. Yeah, with that last example we had here. So the argument with your partner is not the same thing as the parent. It has to do with emotion in kind of relational way, but this is not how we code. Yeah, so yeah, you wouldn't, that would be kind of a third level hierarchy, but you would be already mixing up things. So what do we have here? Well, in that instance, we have actually 2 things. We have type of emotions, we have the cause of emotions, and then you could maybe have another category, which is consequences of emotions. And you keep these things separately. And if there is a sentence about, you know, I'm very angry because I had an argument with my partner and we were throwing around the pots and pans or whatever, yeah, then you apply 3 codes. Yeah, not a code that has all of this, your type of emotion, cause of emotion, and consequence of emotion. So we double code or triple code in that instance. And that's what we can utilize later in the analysis. Yeah, think about first, we have to put the data neatly into boxes first, so then we can retrieve the data later. So principle 2 is the description of a given category should apply to all the codes in the subtree below. So it's all kind of relates to each other. Yeah, so that means if we describe what emotions are, yeah, and then of course we have the type of emotions, and you know, anger, happy, sad, and hopeful, and so on. But that all would fit under a greater, larger definition of emotions, and then we have like a more precise, more detailed sub definitions. Yeah, so think about that. But then if we mix something else in there, then that top definition wouldn't follow, it wouldn't apply anymore. And the subcodes in the tree should not switch part way down. They must remain generic with respect to the higher category. So this is basically, again, in words or more theoretical words, what we already have seen before. I need to drink something out, a bit of a cold. So don't mix different things together. Always think about, does that, if I would define my top level code, does that higher definition still apply what I have as subcodes? So this is actually taken from the book. So you see it's all a bit, you know, yellowish already, and from the design. but I just wanted to give you that as an example. There are 3 things that are wrong here. Yeah, the type of subcode switches partway down, so it starts with attitude, and then it's an attitude to politics, spouse, and divorce, and then other things beneath this. And the actual attitudes, whether you have a destructive attitude or a positive attitude, the kind of attitude you can have, that's here all below in those in those lowest level. And because now it's divided by topic, all these types of attitudes need to be repeated or multiplied a number of times. And so we have attitudes, but then there is also topics you can have in attitudes about, and then politics divided into different things as well. So this would be an example where the type of subcode switches partway down. Then we have a similar or identical collection of sibling categories. It's repeated many times. That's what I've just explained. So that needed here on that level, it's repeated a lot. And there's no place where all codings of a particular attitude occur. It is split up into repeated occurrences and other subtrees. So we have now, if one of the type of attitude would be destructive or positive, well, we have a bit of positive attitude here, a bit of positive attitude here, and here, and here, and here. Yeah. And again, destructive attitude, a bit of here, a bit of here, a bit of here, a bit of here. So we never can relate all destructive attitudes to whatever in our data. And then that's what makes analysis more powerful. If it's not in 2 small little boxes, if you can then have the data more general, and then we are free to relate it to everything. We can relate it to the topics of politics. We can relate it to spouse or divorce and their subcodes. Yeah, but we can, and we can also relate it then to something else that we haven't thought about it maybe at this stage of the analysis. Yeah, so don't do that. The third principle is one topic or idea should occur in only one place in the code system. And I actually caused a mistake today in one of the projects. So I said, I leave it so I can show it to you how easy that can be remedied. Then, but that sometimes happens during the process. And actually, I was actually preparing an old project for that I've done, I think in ATLAS 7 already. That's my grounded theory example for how I would structure that in version 8.22, ATLAS 2022, and we can also see that it's the new structure ATLAS 22 has implemented also greatly helps also in clarifying our thinking about it. So what you see on this slide is this idea of like the higher order categories. So you can look for attitudes, for belief, for events, for context. So think about these higher topics in your data, and that you can all code separately. What are the contexts and what are the attitudes people have? What are the actions they're taking? What are the consequences? What are strategies to deal with certain things? So these are just some high level ideas that you can have in mind when you code your data. And here we have an example of that principle 3. We have the attitude, positive, negative, and neutral, and then as positive attitudes, supportive as an example, or destructive or neutral and don't care one. So this way, supportive or destructive or don't care only occurs once in the code system and not under all these thematic codes as well. There will be less coding if you code like that. So the number of codes will be fewer in your project. You organize your project around a smaller number of trees, which makes it more manageable. It also makes it easier to decide what to code, or what I already said before, to have in mind, these are the topics I have, to keep those in mind that you don't forget. And I already said it's easier to manage, also to recognize for other people, but most importantly, it helps you to analyze your data better. It leads to far more analytic power. It's not like, yeah, what I said before, when I see people like, oh, we want to print out everything in an Excel table, and said, yeah, what do you do in Excel? Yeah, you just do descriptive analysis. Yeah, you just start reading stuff again by topic, and because you have set it up in a way, maybe we can't relate things to each other. Well, that's good enough for some projects, but if you want to take it beyond that, and we can do that with software, and that's the beauty of software. With your manual analysis, you couldn't do that, but now with software you can. But that requires that you do build your code system in a way that you're able to utilize the tools. So how many kind of top level categories are the recommendations? Yeah, like Pat Baisley, you might be familiar with her book Analytical Strategies. She kind of suggests 10. I think sometimes you might need a bit more, so somewhere between 10 and 20. So it's really depending a bit on the project as well. Yeah, but something along that way. So we not, again, not 50 top level categories. Yeah, so keep them in that range. Yeah, and the trees, they usually don't have to be more than 2 or 3 level deep, and that's where, with regard to where the coding is. Yeah, we will see some example where the level might be a bit deeper, but only for organizational purposes, for housekeeping purpose, basically, not for coding. The coding basically can mostly be in the category and subcodes, and everything else is just for organization housekeeping purposes. So as a summary here, the items in a particular branch are similar as they present the same kind of thing. So all the siblings, yeah, well, as in a family, they're kind of different, but they all have this, most of the time, some kind of last name. They are not associated with each other. Yeah, so every subcode is also its own thing, can be clearly defined. The code systems usually are theoretical. It's not yet, or will never be. So the theory that you might develop, or the model that comes out, some relations that you find based on it, and then you start, mapping those and stuff. That's not mapped in your code system. The code system is purely describing your data so you can work with them. So don't start thinking about, that also tell you, don't have your, don't start with coding with your research question or answers you have in mind. No, start coding what the data tells you. This is what your respondent said, this is what you code. Answering the research question, that comes later. So it should be logical, so you can find what you're looking for. And that's easy done with 10 or 15 categories. And each item will only appear once in the catalog. Yeah, already said that. And yeah, so this is, we can share that presentation also later. So a lot of the recommendation that I put here together, that I have, it's kind of a summary out of another presentation, but this is where I went through the different authors. So that's not only me that is saying that. So kind of went through, my books and looked for recommendations that people make on how to build up the coding system. So it's also not only, Richard and Richards, it's actually kind of across the board, also across different authors, what they recommend. So let me now go into the software. And
Susanne, it's Christina. You asked me to tell you when it was past, which is
now. It's 43, no, 34 now. Yeah, I had thanks. Just before, because that fits better now with what I've been to show you the mistake I actually started realizing here once I cleaned up that project for version 22 here. So this is Atlas, and I will then start also one step further. But look here, I have attitude, and that's changing attitude, and that's patriotism. So that's exactly the violation of what I said before. Well, changing attitude is a consequence of something. It's not, and patriotism is a type of attitude. So here it's mixing two things together. I always felt like they said kind of uneasy, but I didn't know what to do with them. And that was, again, that came from older versions where, we didn't have the structure. And now working it into the structure, it's kind of like, yeah, that doesn't fit here. Yeah, but look at here, I have patriotism here as well under justification. And this is the project by Julia Corbin on war experience that she uses in her book. Yeah, so the patriotism here, well, I can merge that here now because that's actually belongs here as justification to go into war. That is about the Vietnam War here, that where people weren't drafted, but they volunteered to go. And then we have a changing attitude, and that is actually an effect. Now I wanted to strategies to deal with the factors influencing effects of all here. It is so, and that I just put it here under a positive effect, and just move it there, and then this can go. And now I have cleaned that up, and just to also see, once you start realizing this sits uneasy, that's actually exactly against violating nothing but both principle 2, and have other categories where it fits better, and then it's easily fixed. And so I just wanted to show this as an example, but now I want to take a step back. So this is as you can see from the title, if it's what I call my Garner theory example, end of tagging interview 1. So what I did here was kind of going through and tagging information, and if you look at what the respondent said in the first interview, and this is all not particularly organized. There's some first categories, the attitude thing here again, that I seem to have been dealing with the war. I show you this one, something about the peace movement that completely disappeared, that was subsumed somewhere else at some point. So you might have ideas at the beginning that turn out to, well, at least the naming is not proper, and the coding, of course, is somewhere else, but it's then moved somewhere else. And from what I said before, the way you can approach coding here from a more interpretive point of view, I for this project work a lot more with the quotation manager. So you see all the comments here for quotations, and then based on the ideas you write down here, that you then start develop your conceptual code. So that's much more writing, interpreting, thinking about the quotations going on in developing the code system, as it would be the case with another project. So it's the way of how to approach coding, and also so ground theory is not ground theory. If you look at the Sharma's approach, and it talks about Gerund coding, then I wouldn't even start working with codes. I would work with the quotation names here, and then do Gerund coding first by just naming quotations, and then kind of starting collecting afterwards on a higher order level. So really to start, not even on a kind of a subcode level or anything that's already a code, but really below that, working on with the quotation level, and then trying to develop concepts that actually then turn into codes. And at some point you have ideas for categories and subcodes. So that's where the difference actually lies in the different methodological approaches, according to the way I see it. And now we can go back to that, a later stage of the project. So this is actually already the stage what I call integrating categories. So much later stage of the project, and now you see that hierarchical principle in action, so to speak. Atlas has something like folders, and so we have here effects of war, and then we can have the negative effects and the positive effects. So we have then 3 levels here, but you see it's all kind of the same topic. Yeah, we have the effects of war. We could define, giving an overall parent definition, and negative and positive effects, and the detailed subcodes, they kind of all follow underneath, and it's not switching topics in between. Yeah. Then factors influencing emotional arrival, facilitators, and barriers. So that also follows kind of the same parent code idea here. So you can, we will see at another project, there can also be more levels for like housekeeping purposes, because I could have barriers and facilitators, of course, also on that level here. Yeah, I take it out of the folder right now. But yeah, and if I would do that with all of the categories, it would be less clearly organized, and then it's just an alphabetic order. And this is already then if I want to go for factors influencing, if I have that idea, then I can quickly find, or no, move the wrong one, quickly find the barriers and the facilitators that need to go in here. Yeah, so you can use the folders and also the higher level categories in MAXQDA for housekeeping purposes. And in NVivo, you also have the folder idea. It's implemented a bit differently, but that's kind of for housekeeping purposes. So you see kind of that here in action. So I need to kind of look at time. I have an NVivo project here loaded. This is a different, it's I would call that content analysis, thematic analysis. This is about an evaluation of the computer game Minecraft, and there is some evaluation codes here. That's a folder here, so that's the evaluation of the game's benefits, downsides, and sentiment that was coded like positive and negative, and well, I call that positive but sentiment in the sentence. So it's not, this is all of these programs have sentiment analysis, but this is kind of cleaned up. So this is not just the software actually doing it, but the coder controlling the content. Then there are some other codes here for my history. So you see again these nice separation. We have features, we have guidance, parental guidance, that is the modes of the game, the online aspect of the game, the recommended age, and what the game is. So all different topics. And if is there need to be just overlapping coding or double coding, if somebody talks about the game is challenging, and I recommend it for teenagers and not for people under the age of 9 or something. So then you would kind of double code. So here you have the possibilities of also to work with folders, or to have your categories and subcodes. And if you want, there could be a third level here underneath. But if you have a third level, think about it, needs to follow the same parent code. So that example we had before with the fishery, where there was some more detailed about that, what was still part of economy. And what you see here on the screen, what I kind of prepared here a bit, is then what you can do. So here we have the from me kind of coded sentiment is that a negative sentiment instead of positive, or kind of a positive but sentence related to the benefits of the game. And we see the benefits of the game here, and there's lots of sentiments related to that, positive ones, a bit positive, but and not much negative. But if you go to if you now select the negative, the downsides of the game, the codes for the downside of the game, pick the changes, give the software a bit of time. small sample project, but you still kind of see the trend. Yeah, so it's the downside of the game I describe here, and it's related to much more negative sentiment. Yeah, and or the positive, but it's okay, but there are these social emotional danger kind of things. Yeah, that's then what you can do. You don't have to have the positive and negative all under the game is boring or scam, or that can be all in a tree for sentiment, that can be all in a tree for downsides and benefits. And then you can use the software to relate these things to each other. I think you see, I just want to make that column here wider. It doesn't, anyway, you can still see the benefit, the down, and you know what it means. Yeah, so this is all of these programs can do that, whether it's here called a matrix coding or code relation browser in MAXQDA or code co-occurrence in ATLAS. So this is then what you can do, just as a small example here, where you can make analysis more powerful. And of course, with all of these programs here, it already it says you can always access the data behind it as well. Yeah, so it's not only the tables. If some people say, "Oh, I'm not going to work with tables," the tables give you always a very nice overview. Give you, that's where you can start seeing patterns in the data, and then you can always, of course, access the data behind it. Yeah, and now if we look at MAXQDA, see what project I have open here. Well, that's the same project. We can also switch to another one in a second. Just for this. So this is the same project in MAXQDA with downsides and sentiment. And so this, it's always kind of, and they always look a bit different, but the kind of principle is kind of the same thing, and we could run the same kind of analysis here. And and I have to just go back to ATLAS and show you what I did with a discourse analysis. And again, it would look similar in the other programs as well. So most of it here is in folders. And what I'm analyzing here, actually, if you, what is the discourse here actually we're looking at? Oh, this is German data. And let's look at the, so this is social media comments. And on a video on YouTube, and that can be imported in ATLAS with the function. And and then I coded all of these comments here, and you see on very different levels. So this, I prepared the project because I have been writing a chapter, still in a draft version, on how you possibly can implement discourse analysis. And I was kind of looking at all the possible ways of how things, what are discourse and analysts interested in coding. So that's why there's so many different ones. So I think in any given project, there might not be that many layers of coding, but it's just, showing examples for lots of different ways. So there are, of course, if you look at discourse analysis, you look at language, and then in the terminology, then they talk about attitude, and under that you have something like stance, and stance is divided into affect and eventuality, and also stance and appreciation, and that's what's under appreciations. And then I put also choice of wording underneath here. But these were the stance and appreciation, that's appreciation, affect, eventuality, that comes from literature, how discourse analysis kind of define that. And then I put different ways. So the coding here is always in the, where you can see here easily in how the affect is distributed here in a way based on the code colors, just on the, and then, of course, again, the interesting things is, as I showed in the example before, can I relate affect to something else? And that's, that I can relate affect to also sentiment, or I can relate affect to content. Where's my, the the themes. Yeah, what kind of, yeah, there's comparison with other vehicles. It's about Jeep. There are cultural aspects that are mentioned. Yeah, and that's the nice thing, to then relate the topic, what they are talking about, to the language aspects. You know, how do they talk about it? Did they use affirmation or stance? Or, yeah, and this again can be done with code co-occurrence analysis. And that's where the power in the analysis is. Yeah? The data are nicely put into these categories, and now you can work with that and get interesting stuff out of the analysis. So I stop here and we open up the questions. And
Susanne, thank you so much. It's Christina here. That was really great. I found the balance that you gave us between the kind of conceptual and theoretical thinking about coding and the practical application of that in the programs really, really great. So thank you very much. I'm sure the recording is going to be really useful to researchers and teachers around the world to think about this in a bit more detail. There's lots of questions. We're probably not going to have time to get through them all. But I'm going to focus on the ones which relate specifically to the idea of generating code books. Maybe you'll be happy for us to send you the other questions afterwards, and you can respond to them in an email that I can send out to everybody with the recording. But let's start with what we thought was a really interesting question from Pedro. Do you think that every branch in a code tree needs to have the same number of levels for consistency?
No, that really depends on the data that, you know, because sometimes, well, if you have sentiments, there will be 3, maybe only 2, if you look at positive and negative. And then you have yeah, and also here we have the different themes, and here on that, you know, that this for housekeeping, you know, these are the top ones, but how many themes do we have in that data? And let's so if you analyze another, you know, social media discourse, like what are they talking about? Might be 5 topics, might be 10 topics, and then again under each of these there are, you know, whatever they talked about. So yeah, it's that is completely different. What I would caution you for, if as an indication that your category is not on the right level, if you then suddenly have 30 subcodes, that's when I would look at whether you're not mixing up things, or whether you cannot really, whether you can divide it up into things. So that would be an indication if something is really long, not if one has 5 or 6 subcodes, because that might be then something that you have everything under emotions, but one might be, you know, types of emotion, that other might be strategies to deal with emotions. So that might be actually then need to go in different categories. So that's yeah.
So it's about each area in the code system working for whatever the function of that area has its purpose for.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'll move on to a question from Carlene, who says that you differentiated, Susanna, between coding for coding as analysis and more housekeeping and organizational techniques. That's something that can be quite tough to communicate to other researchers who consider a code to be a code, like a uniform thing. So the question is to do with how would you encourage coming on board with a more strategic coding systems in a team context, when different team members have got different ideas about coding?
Well, you know, you all start somewhere. And if you start, you know, like, you know, let's just code the data. I mean, well, unless, you know, you have a deductive kind of framework. But if giving an example, you know, people have, you know, we code and they come up with all these ideas, and then you have 100 of these codes. We recently worked on a project. We suddenly had you know, very quickly 200 codes. Yeah, then you need to do something about it. Yeah, and then I think it might be also then if you talk to people and say, you know, these and these and these codes, they actually kind of belong to the same thing. Should we put them into category? And then they kind of like, they live there in that category. And this and this and this is also kind of the same thing. And well, you know, if you look at, you know, if you started defining that, we can actually merge those, because it's actually not different. Yeah, well, they're so detailed, we can actually merge them maybe under, you know, a more abstract name. So I think if you start with, like, you know, just letting people code, and then of course then, well, we have this mess what we do now, and then you start explaining them how to clean up, and then you will end up with something like that. I mean, this is something I have, yeah, you know, it might also, I haven't shown it today, but I showed my dissertation coding, which was 1999. That was also a couple of years already after I started using programs. But then you kind of suddenly get ideas on how you organize these things. So this has been developed over time, and how, what works and what doesn't work. And that's why I also gave you the references. So it's not only me, and maybe probably Christina can, also confirm that also other authors, after now 30 years of qualitative computing, have come to the point of saying this is actually somewhat good idea to do that.
And I think I would,
just one sentence. I would, just do it by way of example,
It speaks also your response there, Susanne, to the kind of iterative nature of the coding process, which is particularly important to kind of reflect and account for when people are learning to code using software. I would say, would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, I know from my teaching that if I give people, these kind of ideas, that really helps them to, it takes a bit of a while to have the categories on the right level. People start then, with their structures and stuff, and then sometimes they need a bit of help and say, well, I would do it like this and this, and here, look at this, still mixing up things here, and keep it separately. So it's still if you start doing it, it will not be the perfect code system in the beginning, but it does give people an idea and how this works, and not just, oh, now we have all these codes, what are we doing what are we doing with those? But they might still need a bit of guidance or pointers and saying, I would move this here and I move it here, and
Great. Okay, thanks. There's a couple of specific questions about the functionality of ATLAS.ti. Can I just ask you those quickly? So one's from Ilyana. What is the function of a code group? Is this also a housekeeping purpose, or would they be used for more theme-based categories? And a similar question is to do with folders in ATLAS.ti. Maybe you can speak a little bit about the different functions between folders and code groups.
Yeah, so folders is kind of housekeeping. Yeah, also it's it's that. So now this if I close everything, it's like nice and short. Yeah, and I don't have to scroll like for ages. And then if I want to do something for evaluation, I have my benefits and my downsides here and the sentiment. So it's ease of reach. Yeah, so then I put something in folders, and I know where these things are in my folder. And then of course at some point when you're working, you might have all of these things open. And so that list becomes longer, and you need to scroll a lot. Well, and then you click on the code group downsides, and there you have your downsides. So code groups, for each category, as you can see, I have a group for benefits and downsides and modes and features and stuff. So they kind of mirror the categories as well, but their purpose, one purpose is for filtering. So if your code list has 200 codes, well, if you collapse them all, but you won't have them collapsed all the time. Yeah, if you work, you have a long code list to quickly access something. Also, when you start cleaning up stuff, I sometimes just kind of have like I just mess up with things here now. I don't want to save it, and I want to reorganize. And then I said, oh, these should be actually all under downsides, but they're now all over the place in my code system. So I put them here into my downside, and then I call up the code group, and now it's much easier to clean up things here, and I don't have to kind of move something from here and move something from here. Yeah, so that's something. And the other point is they work as global filters. So if I go to the document manager, and I have this code distribution down here, and now, well, there's lots of codes. Yeah, to just give you an example. So I can't really, see that much. But if I now take a code group, and then it doesn't have to be a category, cannot be just a bunch of codes you just want to look at. So it can be from different categories, and you set it here as global filter. Now I only get my downsides, and now I can click through my cases and see, okay, what are the downsides that are mentioned? Yeah, or maybe also by groups.
Great.
Yeah, so this is for the age recommendation here, or and now I can just focus on a particular also document group by some codes of my interest. That can be a category, but it can be a mix of codes as well. So code groups, think of them as filters.
Great, that's really helpful. Thank you. That spoke to another question that we had. I think we've come to the end of our time, I'm afraid, Susanne. There are a few more questions, but like I said, if you don't mind, if we can send those to you in an email, and then we can pass on your responses to everybody else. So with that in mind, I'd just like to thank you once again for being here today, and for presenting a really useful session for us. I think you'll see in the chat, I'll send you the chat later, but there's lots of thanks and lots of comments about how useful this was. So yeah, from Sarah and myself, thank you once again. Everybody else, thank you for coming. As I said earlier, please let us know any other topics that you'd like us to organise webinars about, and do tap into our last final sessions this academic year, and we've also got a few already scheduled for September. So thank you again, and have a lovely rest of your day, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Susanne.